Welcome to the Advancement Podcast. This is Taylor Schote with Tim Ware, the president of Advancement Coaching and Consulting. Today, we will be discussing practical insights for pastors and church leaders to advance your life, your work, and your ministry. Are you ready to advance?
Hey guys, welcome back to the Advancement Podcast. This is part 3 of the Family Matters series where we have turned Taylor from a co-host into a panelist, and we've got Chad Mackinich joining us again and Pastor Joe McCrary, and I'm just glad to have these guys as we continue. In the first episode, we talked kind of just about their journey and how and that dealing with things personally when you're in ministry. Dealing with times of struggle in your personal life when you're leading. And then last time we kind of started with grief and we talked about that. And we really just talked about the weight of how do you lead when there's a weight on you. And if you're watching, you see we're experimenting and trying to record with something new. And I hope you're enjoying the experiment today. So this episode, we're going to shift a little bit because one of the things of being in ministry, we have to have faith for our church, but there's something about people always, when you're a pastor, you have to do hospital visits, you get to do all these things, and people are saying, Pastor, will you pray for me? And when you're in the midst of a needing a miracle in your own life, or you're needing something in your own world, I just want to hear from you guys as we talk about this. How do you the struggles of having faith for someone else when you haven't seen the miracle that you're needing at this point? And I think for pastors, it's there's a little extra thing because everybody wants you to pray for them. It's not just your best friend or your aunt or your uncle, but everybody says, Pastor, pray for me. So where do you guys? What are the things you see? How do you walk that out? The faith piece as a leader.
I remember not long after we got up and we shared about our journey, kind of where we were at in the middle of it when I preached that Sunday. Not long after that, a dear lady in our church, I wouldn't call her old. She's older than I am, but middle-aged woman.
Considering the fact you're 31, there's a lot of people that are older.
Yeah. You know what I mean? She's older than me, middle-aged woman, gets diagnosed with cancer. And we do, like many churches, we have a time of prayer during our service, and some of the pastoral team lines up front, and she comes up and says, Pastor Taylor, I've been diagnosed with cancer. And will you pray that God would heal me? And honestly, because it's easy, I don't want to say it's easy, but you get so, you put that hat on. I'm pastor right now. I prayed with her, not a routine prayer, not a canned prayer, but a prayer that I felt was full of faith. And I remember walking back to my seat, going, God, everything I just asked you to do for her, I'm asking you to do for us. Because for us, it's in the moment, it's a physical thing, and we need the same healing power of your hand on our lives that she needed on her lives to be removed of cancer. And it was tough because then, your mind and the enemy wants to cause you to wonder and doubt. Well, if God only heals so many people, if God only does so much, and that's not what our faith teaches us. But when you're in the moment and you're not seeing healing at all, it was what made sense to grab a hold of. So I remember telling Morgan, hey babe, we're gonna pray as fervently and passionately for that lady as we're gonna pray for ourselves. Because if God does it for us, then we're gonna trust that He can do it for her. And if God does it for her, that same God has the power to do it for us. So we tried really quickly to not allow bitterness or even discouragement, or even this God hear our prayer and not anyone else's. We tried really hard at first to not allow that to take a root in us.
So let me unpack what I think I hear you saying is that for you guys to walk out and have the faith for other people began with I'm going to use a little bit of a word you didn't use, is that you had to take a stance of generosity that says that we're going to believe God just as much for others as we're going to believe for ourselves. That there was it sounded to me like there was a generosity component, that this is bigger than just us. We have to do this for others.
Yeah, that's the great way to put it, because for us, again, we made it a quick decision because it would have been really easy for us to turn our backs on this, that the same God that could heal her, that we were going to believe that would heal her, was going to be is the same God that's going to heal us. And so we wouldn't want God to be stingy with her, because if he's stingy with her, that mean he could be stingy with us, and that, I know all our theology teachers listening to us out there might go, well, that's bad theology. But in the living in that crisis, I don't turn to my theology to figure out how to live life. You just live life,
I think that's cool. The idea of being generous rather than selfish. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So that's good. I really like that. So when you're walking this out in faith and believing for your own miracle, and you haven't seen it, now for you it was something personal, and Joe, there was a personal piece. But the truth is, even in Joe's life, since his grandmother had the kidney disease, his dad did, he did. Like Chad, he's carrying a weight that's a little different because it's a weight for their kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weight that. Because I have one child who now has type 1 diabetes, or has been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. The percentages of brother or sister having type 1 diabetes is significantly higher, even though that there is no traceable anything up either out my line or my wife's line. Like, no one has had type 1 diabetes in our family. So there's also the weight of the moment of the diagnosis and the years that have followed. But now there's a weight of, hey, when we start to see other symptoms in a sibling, I've done glucose checks, prick the finger of my other children when they're sleeping, just to make sure that their glucose levels are normal, because that's, because we're just watching and being cautious of that.
So let me ask you guys this question: when you're walking these things out, and I can really see it as a parent, because anybody that's a parent, there's something different. What you just described, Chad, is a real tension between faith and fear.
Absolutely. Well, faith, fear, and a little bit of reality. It's not that I'm. I guess there is a level of apprehension that one of our other children could have diabetes. At the same time, we've walked through it for 5 years, seeing God be faithful. And we know that if another child was diagnosed, we've already kind of been there. And we have our pattern of life. Nevertheless, yeah, there is definitely a level of that tension of faith and fear.
So how do you manage that tension? Would be I think the question, if guys are out there that they're thinking, well, how do you manage that fear? Because I'm walking that out right now. What were you going to say, Joe?
I will say for me that, one of the things about having a long-term kind of a chronic disease that has been in my family, and the likelihood having 2 sons that it's going to be passed down. One of the things for me that's really important is to instill in my sons that faith, to know that God's going to take care of everything. And that's really tough. Part of that has been for me being vulnerable with my kids and openly talking to them, because both of them have come to me and they've said, Dad, do you think I have the same thing you've had? Do you think I'm going to have a kidney transplant? Am I going to have to be on dialysis? All the things that they saw me go through. And one of the things that I say to them is listen, I can't tell you everything that's going to happen in life. And in fact, our nephrologist tells us do not even get them checked right now. It would do you no good to get them checked for anything right now. But we try to instill in them that faith while being real and honest with them. And I pray for people all the time. I lay hands on, anoint them with oil, and I pray for them. But I can be real, and every pastor, every staff member knows this to be true, that you pray for your kids with a sincerity that is different than you pray for anybody else. You have a love for your kids that is deeper than you have for anyone else. And when I pray for my kids that this thing is not going to be passed on to them, that's a different level of faith and a different level of trust than I have with other people. And that's sometimes it's tough to balance that and to make sure that that doesn't get in the way of my ministry here in the church.
Good. So when I listen to you guys talk about this, the thoughts that come to the couple of things that I feel like I heard is one, you have to be honest about be honest with yourself and others that need to hear it, that there's a tension in my life, be honest with yourself. And then I think something you said, Joe, that kind of ties back to what Taylor said about being generous with your faith is our faith is strengthened when we pass it on to others.
Yeah, for sure.
Our faith we're not compromising our faith when we make sure to teach this, whether it be to our children or as a pastor, when we talk on these things, when we release our faith, and we communicate about our faith, that it's sustained. So there's something when you're walking it out about talking about the faith, the faithfulness of God, and the fact that you believe God's in control.
Yeah, and there's a difference between preaching faith and just having this outward kind of a show that, oh yeah, I trust God, and actually trusting God and actually living by faith. And when you're facing things like everyone here is face, Chad, Taylor, myself, that there's a real difference in going home and your kids seeing you live by faith. And I know there are probably pastors who do not live the same kind of a lifestyle at home that they preach in the pulpit. And
I hope they do. Let's assume they all do. For the sake of our podcast.
I'll assume that they all do, but sometimes what happens when you're facing sickness or anything, sometimes that can be difficult because when you don't feel well, sometimes it's hard to praise God in the midst of your storm.
That's true. I think it is real. One of the things in teaching and working with groups from multiple faith traditions, and you mentioned that in your church you guys anoint with oil and you pray for the sick. Not everyone follows that faith tradition, but there's not one pastor I've ever met who didn't at some place have to ask, wasn't praying for God to heal them. So there's heal someone. So there's this universal component that God responds to faith, and I think that's the piece that is sometimes difficult when we're in the middle of the storm. Is when we're in the boat, as Taylor talked about, I think in the first podcast, the first episode of this series, when we're in this boat, believing that Jesus has got it and latching on to that hope, because faith is tied to hope. So let me ask you a question, Chad. In your situation where your daughter has this chronic component, what does hope look like? And how does faith walk itself out?
Wow. I think there is the hope that one day there is healing. I think that there is hope that one day there's some sort of cure. But I would say that's a very distant hope. I think the hope that I would say that we live in on a daily basis is that we hope that we are that we represent what God can do in the midst of a diagnosis, that we can represent his faithfulness, that we can represent that someone can make it through in the midst of whatever's going on. And that is, as parents, as pastors, we live in that moment recognizing that there are things that are going to happen that aren't going to go our way. There are diagnoses that happen. Disease is a real thing in our world. And so to make sure that we are just living out, allowing our faith to be expressed in every day, in the midst of the frustration, in the midst of the glucose highs, and definitely in the lows. And one of the things that we talk about in diabetes, our doctor has written a book. He calls it sugar surfing. So we just ride one wave of highs and lows when it comes to her glucose, and just kind of knowing that that's really the way that we kind of see our path through life. That it's we're not going to get too high when things are good, and we're not going to get too low when things aren't where we would hope them to be. And so hopefully that the one thing that people can see in us is that our faith is constant, that we believe that God is constant. So what is the hope that we have? That other people ultimately see God through us and through the process of our day in and day out living.
I think one of the things that, I obviously, all of us have had moments where we've had to believe in faith. And, a couple of years ago when my father-in-law was diagnosed with cancer and the Lord took him home, in that journey, I realized that, some faith traditions have a stronger emphasis on suffering than others do. And I think that in the middle of these moments, one of the things the Lord talked to my wife and I about was the fact that I think it's very easy for us to get caught up in the temporary and realize that, Philippians says that our citizenship is in heaven.
Yeah. And
that there's something much greater on the other side of this life. And I think sometimes I have struggled with, and talking with other guys, that sometimes I struggle with the tension of my faith in what God wants to do with me here versus my faith of what is waiting for me in heaven.
Yeah. Well, we know our greatest hope, obviously, is Jesus. That's our greatest hope. One of the things that I struggle with more than anything, my mother passed away in 2001. She was 47 of cancer. And I had several people tell me, oh, if she had just had more faith, then she wouldn't have died. And
wow.
I had people tell me the same thing with my kidney. Pastor, you don't have to go on dialysis. Pastor, you don't have to go through this. If you just have faith, then God's going to heal you. If you just have faith, then he'll just heal you right now. And let me just, that damages a lot of people's faith because it removes the sovereignty of God and the plan of God. And we have to remember that God has a process for your life. I've seen God do things in an instant with people, and you have too. We've seen God miraculously heal people in a second. And then we've seen God work through months and through years sometimes to bring about the resolution or the answer. And that's, I think, where it's tough for us, especially as pastors, as any pastor, any staff member. What's tough is when you're facing that difficulty in your life, to stand in front of somebody who needs healing, them knowing that you're going through something that you haven't seen a resolution for, and yet still trusting that God is able to heal them, and still telling them, hey, God can do this in a second. And I think that's where the difficulty is sometimes for us. And yet still, we know that God can do it and God will. We just know that his ways are far above ours. His thoughts are far above our thoughts.
I think you just brought up something really good. Did Taylor, Chad, has anybody told y'all if y'all just had more faith,
Well, I got told, I got chastised because I didn't allow I didn't allow my child to be prayed for by someone. They told me that they shamed me because you never even invited me to come and pray for your child. And
you want to punch them in their face?
Yeah, absolutely. I was in the auditorium right after a Sunday morning. So there were too many witnesses to punch them. But I wanted to.
There were too many that moment, but I wanted too bad anyway.
Yeah. And, but lovingly just think that is so out of place. But then also deal with it from the standpoint of, being in a service and hearing someone from a platform saying, hey, we're praying for heaven. We're looking forward to the day in heaven where there is no sickness and disease. And this person from the platform very lovingly and not taking into consideration, I don't expect them to take into consideration our circumstance, but they went off a list of diseases that aren't in heaven, and diabetes was one of them. And so then for my 7-year-old at the time to say, Daddy, I think I just want to die so I can go to heaven and not have to have diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
That's a huge, what do you do with that moment? I know that's a little bit off the subject, but
no, this is good stuff.
But what do you do with that tension of, yes, we believe that God can heal and we've seen him do it. And yet we're also trusting that God's faithfulness is going to come through and that people are going to see us kind of walk through and wrestle with the challenges of what it means to live as parents with type 1, but also preparing my child for what it's going to look like in her adulthood and beyond, for her to live with those challenges and handle them, not only physically, not only mentally and developmentally, but also spiritually. What does that look like? What does that mean for her and how she views God as healer and trying to process it that way?
I really love the way this conversation has just taken a little bit of a turn because I think sometimes this piece is there. What I've heard you guys just talk about is the fact that as leaders, we have to, if I've seen my miracle or I've never walked this path, our faith has to be partnered with compassion. And that's what I heard you guys say is, well, your faith wasn't strong enough, or you didn't let me pray. And when your daughter hears that we have to make sure that our faith is tempered with wisdom and compassion, because not everybody's in the same spot. And as leaders, our words matter.
Yeah, Tim, listening to Chad and Joe talk about those experiences, Morgan and I, we probably did have people, I tried to forget the stupid things people share sometimes. And really I had a former pastor help me in this. He would say that people oftentimes are sincere and sometimes they're just sincerely wrong. And it just helped me.
Really good.
It just helped me in our journey of people would come up and, we would have one person come up and tell Morgan, and I think I know her heart. She would tell Morgan, she'd say, Morgan, I'm praying for you because, I had the opposite problem. I couldn't quit. I couldn't not get pregnant. And I know she meant it as a, God can do it and all these things, but it was discouraging, just like what Chad and Joe are talking about. But the reality is we just reminded ourselves, and it was not, listen, just because you remind yourself of it doesn't make the pain of it any less. It just gave us an out to forgive quicker. Is that, man, they're doing their best. Most of them, there may be some dummies out there, but most of them are they're trying to have faith with us. They're trying to be an encouragement. Sometimes you got to tell people, hey, I'm a proponent of, hey, it would be helpful if we didn't share that. I actually, later on in the journey, had to go to a lady and say, hey, I actually need you to not do what you're doing anymore because it's not helping. The second thing that as I was listening to Chad and Joe and you talk, I thought, one of the things we did to navigate believing for others is we've really learned to quit telling God or asking God how to do his healing. And we focus just more on him being a healer. And so whether, oftentimes, and I think any pastors listening has probably prayed this, but it just is a good reminder when I go up to pray for healing is, God, whether you choose to do it miraculously, divinely, supernaturally in this moment right now, or if you choose to do it through medication, if you choose to do it through doctors, or for us, what we started to pray and our believing was, God, if you choose to give us a child through natural childbirth, through the natural process, Chad, or if you choose to, with the assistance of doctors and medication, or God, even if you choose to do it through adoption, God, our promise of having a family one day is still true. And really, let me bring it back to what we're talking about. We quit trying to figure out for God how he should heal. So for us, it erased if you had more faith right now, then God could divinely heal you.
That's really good.
Yeah.
And sometimes in the midst of a tumultuous circumstance, when you're facing something like Taylor, what you guys were facing, Chad also, in the midst of the circumstance when it's heated up, there is such a sincerity in your prayer and you pour everything out to God. The problem is when you get a little bit of an answer, sometimes that zealousness leaves us. In my case, it's much the same way. I'd walked through this journey and I was at an altar every day and I was pouring my heart out and I was having to hear the voice of God just to continue moving forward. And then I got word that somebody was going to give me a kidney, and it was like all of a sudden now, hey, I'm just on cruise control. I mean, God just answered this thing and it's over now. And I think God sometimes says, hey, where's the faith that you were trusting me with before? Right. One of the things I recognized about the early church was the early church didn't have the answers that we have. They didn't have the kind of things that we have. And so their only answer was prayer and to trust that God was able to do those things. And I think sometimes we lose some of that in our faith by our immediate responses.
So you're saying
sometimes the trusting God.
Let me put this in a different phrase. So you feel the challenge to live with the same faith on the other side as you did in the midst of the storm.
For sure, and that's what I feel God sometimes saying is, hey, because I will say this, I was closer to God when I was in the storm or in the midst of it than I was when I was out of it. And that's transparent, but it's true. And it's because I was forced to spend more time at an altar, forced to hear the voice of God. I literally couldn't make it unless I heard the voice of God. And God sometimes says, hey, where is that time at? That's what I want. And that's what, when I teach about the process being the plan, what I mean and what I tell people is that it's because during the process, when you don't have any other answer, when you don't have any other hope, God is your hope. He's your source. And he's the one that you're crying out to in the midst of all that. And through that process that you grow more than you grow at any other time.
Wow. That was a twist I didn't expect to hear. So we're coming to the end. We're going. These are taking a little. These are a little bit long. This is good stuff. So here, what I made note of is be generous with your faith. Keys to walking these things out in faith when you haven't seen it yourself. Be generous with your faith. Be honest about your faith, your fear, your situation. Pass on the truths. Be consistent. I love what you were told, Taylor. I wrote down that we need to recognize that some people are sincere while being sincerely wrong.
Yeah.
But at the same part, the follow-up statement is probably where the great power is, and that's this idea that we need to forgive the stupid stuff quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there's going to be a lot of stupid stuff.
It's true.
It is.
There's going to be a lot of stupid stuff, and we just we have to get over it quickly. That's when you said that was strong, and And the last thing you said, the way I wrote it down was this. I wrote down, we need to focus on the traits and character of God rather than on the methods of God.
Yeah.
So good conversation, and I'll just take it as far as from a takeaway. That last statement, when that was, I mean, and I think and I also need to add to the list that our faith doesn't end when the storm ends. We need to take the lessons of the storm with us out of the storm. Maybe that's the best way to say it. Take the lessons of faith beyond the storm with us. But my takeaway is that sometimes I often try to tell God how to do his job. And that focus on him being God and let him be God instead of trying to be in his business a little more than I should. It's good stuff, guys. Thank you. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next time on the Advancement Podcast as we wrap up the Family Matters series. And don't forget to subscribe so that you can catch the fresh things we're going to do after the first year, and be looking for information on the upcoming seminar that we're partnering with the Remnant Radio. Talk to you next time on the Advancement Podcast.
Thank you for joining us today on the Advancement Podcast. The show notes are available on our website at www.advancement.cc, along with other resources. Again, this is Taylor Schode on behalf of Tim Ware and the entire Advancement team. We want you to remember that you are meant to advance.